Credit in the bank. How long does a manager have before it runs out, Gary?
Oh, that is a very, very good question, Dave, to start with. How long's a piece of string, mate? It's such a difficult city. We've got so many great examples at the moment, haven't we? And we've had so many great examples over a long, long period of time in football. And and what is credit? What is credit in the bank? What do you need to do first to get credit in the bank? And that's obviously winning lots of football matches. Is that dealing with difficult situations? And helping the club out? Is that is that showing the ability to deal with downturns in form? Is that winning things? Is that winning leagues? Is that winning trophies? Is that keeping your club in a division? I suppose every situation is unique, but certainly there always comes a point as a manager where you maybe feel that whatever credit you may have, whether that's a small amount, is coming towards a point where you feel a little bit uneasy. So yeah, it's a really really interesting situation. I think as a football manager.
Well, let's be honest. Most of the time, when a manager is appointed, it's because the majority of the time, the previous manager has been relieved of his duties due to potential underperformance or other circumstances, which mean the job becomes vacant. And the new head coach and the new manager comes in and has to, as you just said, rescue the situation. It's normally in a pretty negative place. And essentially, turning it positive is moving the team up the division and eventually, hopefully, getting some kind of modicum of success. I suppose that's where you start building that credit up that we talked about.
Yeah, absolutely. And you've seen managers do that over a long period of time. I mean, can you, I suppose it has to be done over multiple seasons, doesn't it? I know it's quite hard to do
Absolutely.
because most managers, I think most managers, let's take somewhere like the Championship at the moment. And let's say Hull have sacked their manager, Tim Volter, and, he hasn't been there long enough to get any credit in the bank, really. So it becomes a style thing. It becomes, are the fans happy with results? No. Have you been there long enough to build any credit in the bank? No. So I suppose they're never simple decisions, and they involve people and their families, but their decisions are based purely, I would imagine, or mainly on results. And then you've got someone like a Mark Robbins who's been at Coventry for 7 years, had two promotions, had to get through a period of time where they had no home ground and had to play at sort of two or three different grounds, and has got the team on the brink of the Premier League. I suppose if you're a fan and you've gone through all of those moments, or you're an owner, I know the ownership group has changed, but if you're an owner that's been through all of that journey with Mark, then I suppose there does come a point that, if you lose a similar game, a similar amount of games to, let's say, a Hull, I use them as an example, it could be any
Yeah.
team, you're going to have a little bit more longevity, or you're going to have a little bit more patience, or you're going to want to give more time to someone like a Mark Robbins, just simply because, like you say, he's built up that bank of trust, that bank of moments over the years where the fans have shared with him those highs, those lows, and they've gone through it together. So therefore, even if you think that perhaps the team is on a massive downturn for whatever reason, which I don't think necessarily they were, but there's still going to be that moment as fans and owners where you think we've got to try and be fair. He's done such an amazing job over such a long period of time. And I think that's probably what we're talking about here, aren't we? Where that credit in the bank, at what point is that enough? How long does that last for? And it's such an individual thing. I think. I mean, you can argue in sort of Coventry's case, they probably had a couple of seasons where each start of a season wasn't good, and they've had that credit in the bank to keep going, and they've had their rewards from it because eventually they've turned the results around. But yeah, it's a really difficult thing, isn't it? Because I don't think anybody gets enough credit in the bank forever. I think we'll probably come on to this in the end, and we'll talk about someone like Pep at Man City. You can win virtually everything, and yet still at some point somewhere along the line that credit's going to run out with somebody. It doesn't necessarily have to be the fans, does it, or necessarily have to be the players. It's going to run out somewhere in the club, and at some point, someone's going to have to do something different. I suppose so.
Yeah, I'm going to extrapolate there my banking analogy now. So I think you've most people have got multiple accounts in the
Griffin
bank.
Saver. Are we going to go Griffin Savers?
Something like that, yeah. So you've essentially got three main accounts that you as a head coach or a manager are dealing with. You've got the account where the players live, the dressing room. You've got the account where the fans are, obviously who surround the pitch or watch on from afar. And then you've got the account which has got the ownership, the board, the executive, whatever you want to call it. And essentially, you as a manager are trying to keep credit in all of those accounts all of the time. And, you'll be topping up in one area at some stage. You might be fine with the fans because of previous success. So, that's pretty healthy. But you might also realize that you're struggling with one of the others. You're starting to default to go into overdraft with, say, the dressing room, because we know as a manager, when you've been somewhere for a long time, renewing that dressing room, renewing the team, is one of the main challenges, isn't it? You've got to keep cycling around the players. And we know from those great managers of the past, whether it's like a Matt Busby or a Clough or Alex Ferguson is a perfect example, that they've had a lot of continuity in their squads, but they've also had a lot of change through time. So how does it go then for you as a manager? Are you ever conscious about which one of those kind of groups needs to be getting attention to almost keep the credit up, or are you more just concentrated on, as long as we're winning games, all of those groups will be happy?
I think there's an element of both. I think if you're winning games, then most groups are happy anyway. But I think that's just the scenario with it. But you can never think like that as a manager, can you? As a manager, you have to always be thinking, you still have to give time and attention to all things, and you're absolutely correct in as much as you have to be cognizant and conscious of your relationship with the board and how that might like we talk. I think when we talk about these things, sometimes they sound a little bit. It sounds a little bit insincere. It sounds like you have to play a game to do that. You can still be yourself, and you can still be honest, and you can still do this because this is what you actually believe in. And I think that there's a big difference in how you do that. But particularly, the board is a relationship you're having to nurture all the time. Because the reality is, yes, you want to have that relationship with them. But at the same time, if you then go through a downturn of results, again, this is where those relationships are always going to be tested. I always used to. I mean, you could probably add another bank account here, Dave, and it could be the media, because it's exactly this. Because it's the same
Absolutely.
thing. It's you build that account up, and then you hope that there's enough there to not run to naught. Very, very quickly when things go bad. And I think that's the challenge. And I think as a manager, you're aware of that. You're aware of the relationship with the media. It might buy you time if you have a downturn of results. I think the dressing room is different, because I think the dressing room is based on actions, and it's based on day-to-day interactions. And I think players, I think you only ever lose the dressing room when you don't do your job properly, or you react and don't do your job properly. Do you know what I mean? And we've seen that so many times with other managers, or I've seen that as a player before, where a manager starts to blame the players publicly and privately. The training isn't as organised, the training isn't as varied. You stop telling people they're not in the team, and you stop having those honest conversations. And bit by bit, you see the players just lose trust in the manager. But I think that's a really hard thing to do. I think the fans are somewhere in between, in my opinion. The fans are somewhere in between of your actions every game, every time you speak to the media, every time you win or lose a game. I think basically, you have to be consistent with all those actions. I read a manager recently that, he didn't go and clap the fans after an away game where they'd lost. and you understand that sometimes that manager's probably sat there raging about a refereeing decision or something. He probably isn't thinking in that moment, but yet there's probably 3,000 fans there who are going to judge him regardless of results. They're going to judge him in that moment, and that could have an effect on their relationship with him. So I think as a manager, you have to have a broader view of, okay, these are the things I want to do because I believe this is what it should be. But these are also the things I probably need to do because if I don't, this is going to be the impact of those relationships. So I think you're absolutely spot on. I think there's these sort of groups that you have to constantly nurture and try to do the right things, both from an honest perspective and also, a little bit strategically. I think that's the truth. I think most managers would do quite a few things because they recognise that that's what you need to do as well as wanting to do it. So yeah, it's such a difficult thing, isn't it? Because you can take. Okay, I hate doing this because we always go back to the same thing. But the reason is because there's a really good example. But when we're at Stoke, for example, you could have built credit in the bank over 20 games, and then I said something stupid in the press on the back of something that happened in the game and the back of emotions, and straight away you've lost any credit that you had in
Yeah.
in 5 seconds. So I think it takes a lot more time and effort to build good credit up with people, and I think it takes 1 second to ruin all of that good work. And I think that probably tells you how hard it is to maintain it, and actually admire some managers who just seem to be someone like a Mark Robbins who's gone 7 years without, I can't remember one, maybe if I'm a Coventry fan, there's probably moments, but I can't remember one moment where he's probably affected those relationships along the way. So, it is an amazing thing.
Yet, there's a few things to pick out there. First of all, the whole thing about losing the dressing room, and the second being the media. So let's look at losing the dressing room. You've been a player, and I've been around enough dressing rooms because sometimes you are kind of obviously a part of the management group, and it is other times when we swing to being very close to the playing group because we're in that situation where we obviously have sometimes as a kind of performance and medical team, we have a lot more contact time with the players than maybe the coaches do because while we're doing stuff in the morning in preparation or we're doing gym sessions or we're doing conditioning work or we're doing warm-ups, we're around a lot of the conversations that happen. And you do hear those situations where you start to understand that the emotion or maybe the communication within the group is that their relationship with the manager is beginning to change, and especially if some of the key individuals within the dressing room are being affected by that, the key leadership group. And we've talked about leadership groups before in the podcast, where managing them and helping get them to manage their own dressing room. But suddenly when it's now some of them that start to lose the kind of belief in the manager. A colleague of mine spoke to a couple of years ago, and very successful management group he was part of, had been at a Premier League club for a number of years. And they said their biggest challenge was on their kind of onto the third iteration of their team, because of the duration they had been there. Their issue now was that some of the players were transitioning into the the kind of third team, but they had heard all the messages before. They had heard and seen everything that the manager's probably got in his arsenal and his locker. So for that manager to gain any more credit with that player and those players are key in the dressing room was practically impossible.
I think that it's a really difficult thing, isn't it? Because I've seen it where I could sit there as a player and say the manager's lost the dressing room, like genuinely. And then I could see it at times where I can go, okay, so he hasn't done that so well. And maybe there's a couple of people not happy with it who are trying to now influence the rest of them. But I genuinely, I could genuinely see in that situation that he hasn't lost the dressing room, or I can certainly get those moments back. I think it's quite a hard one because, and I'm not saying this from a sort of arrogant perspective, I don't ever feel as a manager that I've ever lost the dressing room. I don't ever feel that that's been the reason why I've been sacked or that's been the reason why I've left clubs.
Yeah,
But I have seen it. Um, and what things would you think as a manager you'd have to do to lose a dressing room? Or what would you class as like a dressing room that's completely, uh, is it the lack of trust in the manager? Is it the like the tactics they don't agree with? Is it just when you go on a bad run of form, players want someone to blame that's not themselves, and therefore the manager's the easiest one? Do you know what I mean? How would you sort of what things would you think you would have to do as a manager to lose the dressing room?
I think one of the ones you mentioned earlier, which is the personal identification or blaming of some of the players for either directly by naming them, which of course is always classed as washing your doing your dirty washing in public kind of thing, naming and shaming a player in the press or somewhere like that, or where the players see that someone's being unfairly treated.
Yeah,
I've
yeah,
seen that in the past where managers have almost had a personal vendetta against players, in which case the group starts to think that's not fair on a human level. Never mind on a professional level, on a human level, they don't agree with how the player's been treated. And very quickly, then the kind of group, it unifies the group in a different way, but not necessarily in the way that the manager would have thought. Oh, we've got great team spirit here, yeah, but it's all against you rather than for you.
yeah,
I think that's probably the main one. If you've ended up, yeah, shifting blame a little bit from yourself and taking responsibility, but we now see managers quite savvy at being able to accept responsibility when in public, certainly, but maybe that earlier in the dressing room they've probably been giving it both barrels to a specific individual. So while publicly it looks like yes, you're taking the blame, in the dressing room you've singled out some people or a person, and the group, as you said there, in 5 seconds you can lose the fans by a comment to the media, and in 5 seconds you can lose the dressing room because you go for the wrong person in the wrong way at the wrong time, and suddenly now there's a disaffected dressing room.
yeah. I think yeah. As you were sort of going through some of those scenarios, I was trying to think of, if you've lost the dressing room, I suppose at that point, uh, well, I suppose there can be isolated incidents, can't there, that can affect that decision making or that thought process as a player to think actually, But I think most in the main, most dressing rooms would be sat there thinking, we now don't think that we're going to win many games. We've got no trust that we're going to win many games with this manager in charge. Now, a lot of that can be, again, putting to one side what you could do differently as a player or how you could improve that situation. But actually, looking at it as a whole and thinking, actually, the way we're playing, the messages we're getting, the spirit in the team that's being created by the management group or whatever that might be, is now at a point where we feel there's a different fix could actually give us some results. It's quite interesting, isn't it? Because I think there's been some stuff. I think it was mentioned the other day in the media that at Leicester, apparently, again, I'm saying this allegedly because I've read this. I've got no first-hand knowledge of this, but player power essentially, helped, I think, accelerate Steve Cooper leaving at Leicester.
Okay,
I don't know whether that's true, but the point I'm making is this is how powerful groups are. That if they feel like they're not going to get results based on whatever factor that is, they are powerful. They will be able to affect change. And I think I also think there's sometimes, if let's say if a manager's not been there long, I think that's one thing. If a manager's been there a long time, I think that's hard for a group of players to do because you built relationships up. But I think there will come a point where everybody, even for a manager, even for staff, where at some point it's, does this need something new? Does it just need something different? It doesn't mean the manager's lost the dressing room or the manager's not very good. It might just mean, like you said, that the messages are, it's the 500th time you've said the same thing. the players no longer has the same effect on the group because they've heard it before. And it might not be necessarily that the message is wrong. It might just be you deliver it in a way that's been delivered so many times before. So I think there always comes a point where for everybody that you need to change banks, Dave. That's what it is.
That's
The
it.
interest rate's not good enough anymore.
The interest rate is through the floor. But, they talk about it in marriage, don't they? The 7-year itch. And ironically, Mark Robbins is,
This could be a very dangerous topic, by the way. I'm not getting
away
involved
with
in
it very
this.
quickly. But, 7 years in at Coventry and Mark Robbins changes. Pep's been at Man City just around 7-ish years, a little bit longer maybe, if I'm going off memory.
Klopp was at Mainz and Dortmund, I think, for about 7 years, and not far off Liverpool.
Well, there you go. You've got, your players might be happy. They're quite happy with the level of success, aren't they? But then maybe the fans want to see something different, don't they? They want to see a different style. They want to hear a different voice. They've heard every post-match interview, every single which way round. And, whether it's after 13 years or it's after 7 years, it's hard to tell people something that they probably haven't already heard before.
Yeah, why is it always the manager? Why is it always everyone loses faith in the manager? Can't we have a change? I'm gonna petition for a change on behalf of all the managers in there. The manager's lost faith in the board. The manager's lost faith in the fans and also the players, and he's decided to pay himself off for a year, and that's it. And it doesn't affect his next job. I'm only joking. So
I like this is essentially that the fans have lost the manager's room and the players have lost the coaching office. I like it. It's the completely opposite.
I'm just thinking, why always me? It's the Balotelli one, isn't it? I might be the Balotelli of managers. Why me? Why all the time? Well, maybe that's why Sir Alex. But let's think about that a second. So, maybe people get fed up we're in the same interviews. Maybe people get fed up seeing the team play the same way. Even if there's an element of success with it, you look at someone like David Moyes at West Ham. Won a European trophy. Yet nobody's happy with, not nobody, but like a large portion of the fan base are not happy with the football, and blah blah blah. So there are times where it can be successful and still people cannot be happy. So. What is about where someone like a Sir Alex Ferguson and the intelligence that he would have had to lead, I wonder if subconsciously or consciously rather, he would think, okay, I have to constantly change this. If I want to be here for a long period of time and I want to build an empire, maybe he didn't think in those sort of terms. Maybe it was just in the moment I have to change the team, or in the moment I have to change, our star player because he's getting too much power or he wants too much power. Maybe, that in its turn changes the way the team plays. But there felt like a constant shift every sort of 2, 3, 4 years at Man United, where in order to stay at the top and therefore, I suppose, keep everybody motivated and happy and keep it fresh, he had to pivot constantly, and change it. Do you think, that was the intelligence of someone like that?
Yeah, well, Sir Alex not only changed the team, and it's well documented how he changed the team over the years and kept reinvented it from the team that he essentially took over in the mid-80s to what he left. Was like, obviously the players have all changed because nobody's going to play for the best part of 28 years, unless they've got some incredible genes, like us. But he was also fantastic at making sure that his backroom staff, and especially those coaches that were very close to him, kept being refreshed as well. So whether it was Brian Kidd at the start, or you had Steve McLaren, or you had René Meulenstein, or whoever came in to assist him, that was a different voice on the training ground, probably delivering different types of sessions, and maybe also keeping up with the modern trends of how football changes, doesn't it? Because how the game was played 30 years ago, 20 years ago, 10 years ago, it keeps evolving, it keeps changing. And actually, part of his cleverness was probably ensuring that he had coaches who were, I'm not saying that the others weren't up to date, but were probably more on current topic.
Well, it's interesting because Rennie, I did did an event not long ago with Rennie Muhlenstein, and he spoke a lot about he was, a technical skills coach. That was his speciality, and he'd obviously done that in different countries. And so maybe a Sir Alex Ferguson, under a Ronaldo or someone like that, would actually really benefit from this one-to-one time with a coach who specializes in helping players to become better. Very egotistical sort of players around the time at those type of big clubs that want to try and improve and want to see the benefit to them. And again, maybe just, ahead of the game, bringing, like you say, the right type of coach for that right group of players, or the right type of coach for the trends that were moving in football at the time. And I suppose that's the ultimate intelligence if he's done it in that way, where, rather than wait for, a new brand of football to essentially make you look old fashioned, you keep bringing stuff in to complement your management skills and just keep in line with how football's moving. Of course, someone like Man United would have started trends. They would have been the ones to create trends, wouldn't they? There's different
Absolutely.
ways of doing it, but yes, food for thought, really, isn't it? Rather than everyone get bored with their manager. Let me think. Let them get bored with the staff and change them. Good idea. This could this
Okay,
could
but
this
I
could
see.
work, Dave. This could
Yeah,
work.
obviously, you need some consistency. Trusted lieutenant, some might say, but maybe coming back to like the whole Pep situation. 7, 8 years now, Man City. Sorry, Freudian slip. And unbelievable success. So the bar is so high that almost losing 2 games a season nowadays in the Premier League is almost you're out of it. But you're suddenly losing 5, 6 games in the season. Like, it's not that your season's done, but it starts to feel like, as we said earlier, you've lost the dressing room. Are you now showing that there's a bit of an Achilles heel? Is it that the manager can't manage without this one big star? Is it that the manager has lost his way? The questions are going to come about the topics we said, lost the dressing room. Some of his players have been there a long, long time with him. And maybe, alluding back to the other conversations, maybe they need a different voice. Maybe he needs different players, in a different club. Who knows? Is it got to the point where maybe it's not working anymore, or are we all just jumping the gun and thinking, the end is nigh, the king is dead, but maybe long live the king?
Yeah. Well, I mean, look, every sort of period of domination is always followed by another club taking that crown and either dominating or multiple clubs. I don't, we've seen it in the past. There's not one club that can dominate forever. So there's always those natural swings and natural highs and natural lows. I think there's very. I mean, you know, if you're someone like Pep Guardiola, he's probably one of a select group of managers, and I say group of managers. I bet if we went through history, there's probably only about 20 managers in time that could never outstay their welcome. Couldn't have got so much credit in the bank that it will only ever be them that makes a decision to leave and nobody else. I think if you look at that, if you look at 6 league titles, 2 FA Cups, 4 League Cups, 1 Champions League, there's so much credit. I might have got them slightly wrong, but there's so much credit in the bank that, probably changed the style of play to I won't say globally, because there would have been other managers around the world that would have played in different ways that probably haven't been given the credit. I mean, he credits Bielsa, who's been doing it for years, yet no one said Bielsa's changed football at any point, really, did they? So
Yeah.
unless you're spying on the opposition, of course. Can we edit that bit out? But even that he owned.
Yeah.
So I mean, yes, the fans will be questioning some moments. Yes, Pep even looks himself like he's questioning. I mean, in some ways, it's heartwarming for every other person in football to understand that even he feels some semblance of pressure. Even he, has cracks in his demeanor that going to show, just how hard it is when you don't win games for a period of time and everyone expects you to win games. The frustration, the self-doubt, look, I'm sure his are going to be a lot less than most managers. But even so, you look at it and he looks like he's showing some self-doubt. He looks like he's showing humility, which I think he always does. But it's incredible, really, isn't it? But the one thing I would say that I've admired the most in this period of time for Man City is that he's not blaming anyone else. A lot of managers would be blaming refereeing decisions, they'd be blaming injuries, they'd be blaming. Yes, of course, he's mentioned that, but he's almost saying, "Look, it is what it is." Like
Yeah.
everyone outside of Man City is looking for answers and criticize, but we have just got to accept that this is football and we've got to change it. But yeah, could you ever imagine Pep Guardiola running out of credit in his, well, what bank is that? It's the
Well, he's
biggest bank
probably
in the world.
he's moved. He's not at NatWest at the moment.
Did he get a free dictionary? Did he get a free dictionary when he opened an account?
He's firmly in Coots or something like that. One of those real high end ones that I've seen in London. I've heard about these places. Obviously, I wouldn't be frequenting them.
He's a bank within Coots. He's the bank within Coots that even people with a lot of money don't know what that bank is.
Well, to the point where, going back to the Sir Alex, there was a time, wasn't there, when he was untouchable, and anybody who'd been around Sir Alex was seen as highly valued in the market. Any of the coaches that worked with him were seen to have, that almost that benefit of having been with him. Same with anybody who's worked under Pep. It's almost been used now as a kind of golden ticket to get in, part of Pep's team of coaches, therefore must have been influenced. But maybe we've got to the point where almost how Pep has played football for years, eventually other people have, I'm not going to say necessarily cracked the code, but they now understand how his teams generally play. There's a lot of copying, of that kind of similar style. Maybe people are now putting their own flavor of it. So you do get I'm not saying that Slot or any of those are copying that, but they've all kind of found their own way now of playing the game at this very, very advanced 4D chess level of playing, that actually, if you don't have your top players at those clubs anymore, you do run the risk of having what would for anybody else be a normal season. You lose some games, you win some games, but just at that high end of the game, the super elite level, you cannot miss a top player who makes the difference in those games across a whole season. And I know we spoke about it before, but Man City losing a Rodri, potentially Liverpool losing a Salah, Arsenal losing maybe a Saka or Rice, or you go to Barcelona, Real Madrid, any of them losing their key players, it doesn't matter how good a coach you are. Well, maybe Pep is one of the few who he can do it, but at the moment, it's not happening for him. And eventually, maybe just the weight of expectation will eventually mean that there's going to be a change and everyone decides, you know what, maybe it just needs to be refreshed.
Yeah, and a slightly aging squad as well. I think we've seen some players there. We've seen the likes of De Bruyne that was once an absolutely pivotal member of that team. Just doesn't feel. It feels like something's changed. It doesn't feel like he's quite as important anymore for whatever reason. I don't know, but so yeah, they probably are in need of a refresh to stay at the top, and it happens, doesn't it? But and I think also, I mean, the first point you make is a great point. It's a really interesting point that credit in the bank is not just for the manager, is it? We've seen it now. The way football's developed and the way football recruitment, in terms of recruiting staff and managers, has developed. If you've got credit in the bank, if you've got a manager that's got credit in the bank, but actually you almost can piggy bank off the back of it. You can piggy bank off the back of it because, in truth, people will look at that and actually, you can utilize that as a member of staff if you've been involved in those successful cultures, which has probably never changed. If you've been in a successful culture, of course, you've played a part in that culture. I think, like you said, I think it's just a cycle of. I think sometimes the cycle of football makes it nigh on impossible to stay at the top for long. And I think actually, when you have stayed at the top for as long as Manchester City have, and don't get me wrong, look, I think it won't be long before they're pretty much back at the top. Whether that's this season, I mean, I still haven't ruled them out for this season, but whether that's the next 5 seasons, they might well dominate. Who knows? That depends on a number of things. But you're right. When the game 20 years ago was even 5 years ago was so chaotic at times that actually, you could probably get away with not one player that almost orchestrates a lot of things. Whereas now everything is so controlled and pattern led and, um, you know, revolving around some of those key players in these systems. But actually, like you say, you take one player out of the system. I mean, it's quite incredible, really, when you look at a Man City and the result. Even before this last Rodri injury, there was talk about it previously, but with Rodri in the team and Rodri out the team, there was a swing of something like 20% of won games, which is quite incredible when you think of, 20 years ago, if you had Haaland in the team, you'd have probably won, no matter who you had in midfield, you'd have probably won nearly every game. If you'd have had Van Dijk and Canate at the back, you'd have probably won most games, whichever way your system worked. But
Yeah.
but now it's got to the point where the margins are so small, so tight, that we're talking about these moments. If one thing's out of kilter, that relationship with the fans, that relationship with the dressing room, that relationship with the board, it's very difficult to sustain success. And they're a very good example of that right now, of just unraveling a little bit, in front of a sort of football world's eyes, I suppose.
Well, time will probably play out this story, but one thing we probably know in this country anyway, in in the UK, is tall poppy syndrome exists, doesn't it? Where Pep's been on top for so long, and everyone's kind of had to bite their tongue with his success, whether they liked it or not. They could put medals on the table, they could put trophies in the trophy cabinet at the end of every season and say it's working. It feels this year that all of the stories that probably have been buried are coming home to roost. You've had all of the stuff about the financial charges. Now you've got the injuries. Now you've got the loss of form. And now is it time for people now who have had to sit there watching the accumulation of credit in the bank start to say, you know what? We're going to chop the legs off this. We're going to create the additional pressure externally. The pressure internally probably isn't that high, is it? You would expect, okay, they expect to win the league every year, but they know it's going to be cyclical. But now it feels like the pressure from outside, from every other set of fans, from every media outlet, everybody is questioning this, because this is probably the first time, probably in the whole of Pep's career and maybe Man City. Not that this is purely a Pep thing, but essentially your credit in the bank goes so far as a head coach until eventually everybody decides it's time to pile on. And that's suddenly when you start feeling that change in emphasis. You must have experienced that. Pep's certainly experiencing that.
Yeah, I like the way you're relating me to Pep. I think in job
Pure
title, that's
juxtaposition.
probably about the only relatable factor. And obviously, I'm better looking than Pep, and have hair. But I think that look, I mean, you're right in what you're saying. I think it's probably accentuated because if you have, yeah, it's interesting how certain managers create certain reactions from other fans, isn't it? Because again, we spoke about Mark Robbins earlier. I don't know many other teams that particularly dislike Mark Robbins. I know you're not talking about the top
Yep.
end, but I
Yep.
think he'd be quite well liked by most teams. But I suppose they haven't won everything and the same title and dominated a league, really. But I suppose in Pep's case, you're right. He's such a popular manager. The way he deals with things, he does it in such a way that nearly everybody tries to copy some of that, tries to get some of that into their teams.
Yeah.
And obviously, it's been well documented, so we can all see it. Yet, exactly how you say it, as soon as there's a little bit of a downturn, everybody loves it, don't they? we love it in this country, don't we, somehow, to try and knock that person off the top of the tree. And it's almost like other, I mean, you know, whether it was tongue in cheek or not, but the Liverpool fans ironically singing "You're getting sacked in the morning" was quite amusing. And obviously he took it well. Did he take it in a good way, or was he having a little bit of a nibble back but trying to laugh about it by putting the six fingers up? You know, was that him showing a little bit of his normality? But you know, he is affected by them things. Like you said, he's probably never had those situations occur. Should have rang me. Should have rang me. I'd have told him how to deal with them. No problem.
Well,
Um,
you saw with Mourinho, didn't you? You know, when he went back to Chelsea with Manchester United, you know, and he was kind of in some way, not by all the fans, because the ones who maybe speak on social media and those channels or whatever are representing some of the fans, not all of the fans. But he's getting a bit of stick from the Chelsea fans, and he's reminding them, you know, I've been super successful for your club. You know,
yeah,
that the pile-on, the credit in the bank, even though, yeah, maybe it's a bit pantomime, but maybe it's not. And you know, certainly the Liverpool fans piling on to the Man City manager the other day is like, well, maybe, yes, there's a bit of, you know, we're in that time of the year, aren't we, where there's pantomime going on. It's a bit of pantomime. How many fans have ever got the chance to chant that? And, you know, no disrespect to some of the teams, but they probably can't afford to say it to them. But the Liverpool fans probably can at this precise moment. So, yeah, unfortunately, everyone's had to bite their tongue for probably the best part of 20 years while he's been managing everybody else in the planet off the planet. Now there's a little chink in the armor, and maybe
great man.
just the credit.
Great
Great
banter,
bad.
having it? It's great. Like you've got to say, even when we've been at the sharp end of that type of stuff, that every now and then you watch a game and there's moments in the game when there's just that little bit of banter from the opposition fans, and you kind of know, and they'll love it when the fact that he's held the six fingers up. In some ways, that kind of vindicates their banter, doesn't it? Because you know that they've had a reaction, haven't they? And that's what all fans want,
That's a
don't they?
bite.
That's a little
That's a
nibble, nibble.
that's a nibble.
Yeah. So you know, but listen. The fact we're talking about someone who's, you know, you could argue in the last 20 years has been the greatest football manager on the planet, or at the very least, the most decorated football manager on the planet. You know,
Yeah.
that even seeing those fallibilities, I think it just shows that, you know, credit in the bank doesn't last forever. You know, you have to work incredibly hard to build that credit up with, like we said, the fans, the board, the media, the players. You know, it can unravel. That's probably the nature of our job, isn't it? It can unravel in seconds. It's astonishing, isn't it?
Say the wrong thing, not get enough results quick enough, and you're under pressure. And suddenly the bank balance is at zero. And then you're going up to High Street to find a new bank. Anyway, a fascinating debate on credit in the bank, and certainly for contemporary listeners, we'll interestingly watch on at Manchester City and see how that plays out. But yeah, thanks for that, Gary. Great topic.
Cheers, Dave. Man City to win. Man City come back and win the league. We're gonna have to edit. We're gonna have to edit 15 minutes out.
Okay. See you later.
So yeah.